9 Creepy Unsolved Mysteries from History. Who doesn't love a good mystery? It's the reason why books such as the Sherlock Holmes series, and Agatha Christie novels, movies like The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and TV shows like Criminal Minds, and How to Get Away with Murder are so popular. Mysteries have entertained the general public for years. People love whodunit cases, puzzles that they can try, and solve themselves before the answer is revealed in the end. We make new discoveries all the time, whether it's a marine biologist discovering an unidentified species living on the ocean floor, or uncovering artifacts from an ancient civilization. We thrive on having mysteries solved for us. But there are some that are really puzzling, that'll probably never be answered. Which only makes us strive for an answer even more. 1. The mysterious Baghdad Battery. With the US invasion of Iraq in 2003, Iraq has lost many of its rare archaeological treasures, including the astonishing Baghdad Battery which, to this day, remains a phenomenon for which scientists have found no satisfactory explanation. This precious historical and scientific artifact, meticulously crafted in materials with distinct chemical properties, is one of the most surprising mysteries of history. It is an achievement of ancient civilization, before which modern man stands aghast, akin to the most dazzling monuments, unique architecture, and timeless drawings. Researchers describe the Baghdad Battery as one of the most mysterious artifacts we possess. Therefore, many legends and fictional interpretations have been crafted around it, including the suggestion that visitors from outer space brought it with them to the area and left it there. Is it possible that an ancient civilization, no matter where it happened to be in other stages of development, had known about electricity many centuries before it was more officially discovered? Is the artifact found near Baghdad a real primitive battery? Was it in use more than 20 centuries before its counterparts? Or is it just an object similar in its exterior to the cell discovered by the Italian Luigi Galvani in 1786? Taking either side to this debate requires that we look more deeply into the story of the Baghdad Battery, which began in 1936 during archaeological excavations in the village of Qujat near Baghdad. Workers drilling there found a strange jar made of yellow clay, amongst the ruins of the ancient city. The group of artifacts known as the Baghdad Battery consists of a terracotta pot, approximately 13 centimeters tall, containing a cylinder made of a rolled copper sheet, in which fits a single iron rod. At the top, the iron rod is isolated from the copper by bitumen, which acts as a plug or stopper, and both rod and cylinder fit snugly inside the opening of the jar. The copper cylinder is not watertight, so if the jar were filled with a liquid, this would surround the iron rod as well. The artifact has been exposed to weather and other conditions which cause significant corrosion. Additionally, the iron rod was found to be eroded by a solution which conducts an electric current, perhaps some kind of acidic juice or vinegar. The battery or electric jar was found among the remnants of monuments belonging to the Parthian civilization, 248-226 BC, which established the vast empire in the region, and therefore the Baghdad Battery is sometimes called with Parthian Battery. The Baghdad Battery drew the attention of the German archaeologist, Wilhelm Koenig, when he saw it among other artifacts at the Iraqi National Museum in 1940. After he studied it carefully, he proposed that the jar might be a cell used to generate electricity, for the purpose of silver and gold plating. Later, a laboratory engineer of the General Electric Company in Pittsfield, a city in the United States, tested a model of the Baghdad Battery he recreated using the illustration of it done by Wilhelm Koenig. Using copper sulfate, he was able to generate electricity of 0.5 volts. In 1970, another German scientist conducted an experiment using a replica of the Baghdad Battery. He filled it with fresh grape juice, and was able to generate 0.87 volts, enough electrical power to paint a silver statue with gold. Scientists and specialists have made several assumptions in the attempt to solve the mystery of the Baghdad Battery. One of them is that the pottery jar was dedicated to the preservation of papyrus scrolls. Another supposes that it was used in relation to acupuncture, especially since needles have been found near the scene where the battery was discovered. A third hypothesis for the Baghdad Battery suggests that it was made especially for the practice of ritual magic, and that priests may have hidden the battery inside their idols and statues of the gods. In this way, Perhaps they hoped to persuade people of their magical strength, which would be felt directly in the warmth created by the light, when the objects concealing the battery were touched. None of this conclusively resolves the mystery of the Baghdad battery, which is just one of the curiosities stolen from the Iraqi National Museum during the U.S. invasion of Iraq. In fact, thousands of other unique artifacts and precious manuscripts have been tragically looted. Perhaps first and foremost then, we must make concerted efforts to uncover the mystery of the battery's disappearance, and try to track the elusive terrain of the black market, especially within Israel and other Western countries. Ultimately, the wondrous Baghdad battery, in all its mystery, should be returned to its rightful home, in Iraq. 2. Oak Island Money Pit. The story of the Oak Island Money Pit began way back in the summer of 1795, when a teenager named Daniel McGinnis saw strange lights flickering at night on an island just offshore from his home in Nova Scotia, Canada. The remote coastline is dotted with small islands, and being only a short distance from the thriving commercial center of colonial Boston, the region was known as a pirate enclave. So when he set out the next morning to investigate, McGinnis had buried loot on his mind. When McGinnis climbed ashore on Oak Island, his curiosity only grew. There, he found a peculiar circular depression approximately 13 feet in diameter, a telltale sign that something had been buried at the spot. So, naturally, the next day he returned with the necessary equipment to begin digging. The deeper McGinnis dug, the more curious he became. The hole definitely seemed man-made. Then, after digging down just 2 feet, he uncovered a layer of flagstone extending across the opening. There was no treasure yet, but his hunch that something valuable was buried there, for some strange or wondrous purpose, had only been heightened. He continued to dig. At 10 feet deep, someone had again covered the hole, this time with a layer of timber, another hint of buried treasure. A second wooden layer was found at 20 feet, and a third at 30 feet. There was still no treasure, and by now McGinnis had dug as far as he could. The legend of the Oak Island Money Pit, however, had just begun. In the years since, various companies and excavation teams, with dreams of buried riches, have taken up the digging effort at the same spot McGinnis found, all still to no avail. Even so, the mystery has deepened. And so has the hole. Wooden platforms every 10 feet have teased excavators, all the way down to at least 100 feet deep. At 90 feet, one of the pit's most enticing mysteries was uncovered, a stone slab with cryptic writing etched on it unlike any writing ever found before. Was it a cipher? A coded clue to the whereabouts of the hidden treasure? The obscure tablet remained undecipherable for decades. But then, in the 1860s, the puzzle drew the interest of a renowned professor of languages, from Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, James Leachy, who claimed to have been able to decode the text. Its message only motivated excavators to dig ever deeper. According to Leachy, it read, 40 feet below, 2 million pounds are buried. Digging such a deep hole is not without engineering challenges. In fact, excavators have been stymied over the years by a number of issues that were only later solved with improved technology and, of course, a bigger budget. For instance, there's a constant battle against water flooding into the pit, as the hole is on a relatively small island just a short distance from the ocean. The flooding is so bothersome that some excavators have even theorized it's part of an elaborate booby trap, set up by the treasure's original borrowers to foil its discovery. The excavation has now drilled down to 190 feet, well beyond the extra 40 feet prophesied by the stone slab's inscription, but still hasn't turned up any loot. If an 18th century treasure could have been buried at such a depth, it would have been a monumental engineering feat. And yet people still seem compelled to dig. The effort has even drawn interest from the likes of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, 32nd President of the United States, who at the tender age of 27 decided to join the excavation effort at Oak Island. Famed actors John Wayne and Errol Flynn also got in on the action, each bidding for a chance to join the dig. Pirate booty remains the most popular theory about the suspected treasure, but other wacky theories have surfaced, too. Some have proposed, via various speculations, that the treasure is Marie Antoinette's lost jewels, or that it might be secret documents identifying the true author of William Shakespeare's plays. One theory even posits the treasure might be the lost Ark of the Covenant. Skeptics have also offered some more tempered theories, suggesting the chasm is actually part of a natural sinkhole, and that it has filled with debris over the years through flooding, and via the complex movements of the water table and tides. The fact the hole appears man-made, they say, is merely an illusion created by natural processes. And of the inscribed stone slab, and other uncovered artifacts. Hoaxes. One way or another, it's worth asking, when will it stop? At what depth will it seem more like a wild goose chase, than a genuine search for buried treasure? The mystery seems to have a life of its own at this point, an obsession that reaches far beyond the enticement of untold riches. The dig has even become the subject of a History Channel reality show called The Curse of Oak Island, which follows the efforts of the land's current owners, Marty and Rick Lagina, as they scour the island for the concealed treasure. Season 4 of the series promises to finally solve the mystery. After more than 200 years of intense excavations, however, anything short of a bona fide treasure is unlikely to halt the hunt. 3. Sea peoples. More than 3,000 years ago, the flourishing Bronze Age civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean suddenly met their downfall. The Trojan War erupted as one of the final events culminating an era of chaos which one archaeologist has named World War Zero, plunging the region into a dark age soon after. And, it was all begun by a mysterious and powerful civilization, which came to be known as the Sea Peoples, a new theory suggests. The new ideas presented by Lewian studies propose a scenario that could explain the fall of the Bronze Age around 1200 BC, and the events leading up to the Trojan War. In the new scenario, it's argued that the many Lewian-speaking petty kingdoms, and Western Asia Minor, a peninsula also called Anatolia, joined together in a coalition to attack the neighboring Hittites. As these Lewian kingdoms spoke a common language, they can be discussed as a single civilization, Eberhard Sanger, head of the Zurich-based non-profit, explained to New Scientist. During the 2nd millennium BCE, people speaking the Lewian language lived throughout Asia Minor, Lewian Studies explains. They were contemporaries, trading partners, and at times opponents of the well-known Minoan, Mycenaean, and Hittite cultures of Greece and Asia Minor. When the Bronze Age drew to a close, the Greeks lost the art of writing for many centuries. But, the Lewians maintained this for roughly half a millennium, the researchers say. Texts from the Lewians were discovered in the 19th century, before the Mycenaean, Minoan, and Hittite documents. Hittite texts reveal that the Lewian coalitions occasionally grew powerful enough to attack the empire. The new theory suggests the Lewians did so once more, roughly 3,200 years ago, converging upon the capital Hattusa from both land and sea. Later Egyptian texts describe raids on Cyprus and Syria by the Sea Peoples, and the researchers suggest these mysterious attackers are actually the Lewians. Attackers set fires to temples and palaces, and drove out the ruling class, until the Hittite civilization vanished into oblivion for 3,000 years, according to the proposal. The massive Lewian civilization then ruled a territory, from northern Greece to Lebanon, they say. Shortly after, the Mycenaean kings in Greece banded together, to destroy the Lewians, who could not defend their large territory. The Mycenaeans built a large fleet, and attacked the port cities of Asia Minor, which were easily destroyed. Then, the two armies gathered before Troy. The subsequent battle, the infamous Trojan War, ended in the complete destruction of the Lewian coalition, and the fall of Troy. But, the victors were met with their own chaos in the years to follow. Kings returned home from war to clash with the deputies, who had since assumed their roles, and some didn't return at all. Few kings were able to resume their claim to the throne, and traditional Mycenaean kingdoms existed next to areas of anarchy, the researchers explain. Eventually, a civil war tore through the civilization, and the Mycenaean era was brought to an end. A dark age began soon after. The researchers from Lewian Studies say this scenario could explain the sudden end of the Late Bronze Age, but not all archaeologists agree with the concept of a lost Lewian civilization, New Scientist explains. And, some debate the World War Zero narrative, and explain that many archaeologists have become skeptical of the ancient narratives, which describe approximate historical truth, like Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. Archaeologists will need to discover similar examples of monumental art and architecture across Western Anatolia, and ideally texts from the same sites, To support Zanger's claim of a civilization, Christoph Backhuber, of the University of Oxford, told New Scientist. Though it's been met with some criticism, archaeologists say the research will bring the late Bronze Age era of Western Anatolia into the light for future studies. 4. The Dancing Plague of 1518. It happened. In 1518, people danced themselves to death for no obvious reason in Strasbourg, France. One woman started it, and others joined her. Within a month, there were 400 people involved. Many died from pure exhaustion. If 490 years sounds like a long time to wait for an explanation, it's hardly a simple case. Discovery History's introduction to the subject is hardly encouraging. In July of 1518, a woman referred to as Frau Trophia stepped into a narrow street in Strasbourg, France and began a fervent dancing vigil that lasted between 4 and 6 days. By the end of the week, 34 others had joined her and, within a month, the crowd of dancing, hopping and leaping individuals had swelled to 400. Authorities prescribed more dancing to cure the tormented movers, but, by summer's end, dozens in the Alsatian city had died of heart attacks, strokes and sheer exhaustion due to non-stop dancing. If that sounds weird, Frau Trophia should have been dead through dehydration after 3 days, max. 6 days, and she was already dead, just still dancing, according to theory. That sort of physical exertion isn't naturally maintainable. Even marathon runners wouldn't be able to do it. Some historical corroboration from the profoundly qualified author of a new book doesn't necessarily help. Historian John Waller, author of the forthcoming book, A Time to Dance, A Time to Die, The Extraordinary Story of the Dancing Plague of 1518, studied the illness at length and has solved the mystery. That the event took place is undisputed, said Waller, a Michigan State University professor who has also authored a paper on the topic, which has been accepted for publication in the journal Endeavor. Waller explained that historical records documenting the dancing deaths, such as physician notes, cathedral sermons, local and regional chronicles, and even notes issued by the Strasbourg City Council, during the height of the boogieing rage, all are unambiguous on the fact that victims danced. These people were not just trembling, shaking or convulsing, although they were entranced. Their arms and legs were moving as if they were purposefully dancing, he said. Possible reason? Stress-induced psychosis. Having suffered severely from famine, and in many cases wiped out and reduced to begging, the region was in an ongoing crisis. Many had died of starvation. The area was riddled with diseases, including smallpox and syphilis. Waller believes the stress was intolerable, and hence a mass psychological illness resulted. It was a superstitious time. From the sound of it, these people didn't have much left in their lives but superstition. Anxiety and false fears gripped the region, Waller said. One of these fears, originating from a Christian church legend, was that if anyone provoked the wrath of Saint Vitus, a Sicilian martyred in 303 AD, he would send down plagues of compulsive dancing. Waller's theory is interesting, and quite a bit more plausible than other theories, including one that it was caused by ergot fungus, the organic version of LSD. Ergot is extremely poisonous, and it's far more likely to kill people than start an impromptu dance party among starving people. The fact they were starving, or something like it, makes the dancing even more extraordinary. Where did they get the kilojoules? Perfectly healthy people can be exhausted by a few hours dancing, let alone days. There were many other strange plagues, which are pretty good supports for the psychological elements of Waller's idea, including a laughing epidemic that went on for 18 months in Tanzania. After all, why should social diseases be purely physical? Just to make the dancing plague a bit more bizarre, there were at least 7 other cases of it in the same region, during the medieval period, and one in Madagascar in 1840. They've even come up with a few ideas for therapy, according to medical epidemiologist Timothy Jones, an assistant clinical professor of preventative medicine at the Vanderbilt University School of Medicine, who also reported an incident of hysteria in Belgium following soft drink consumption. Outbreaks of psychogenic illness are likely to be more common than is currently appreciated, and many go unrecognized. Jones recommends that physicians treating such problems attempt to separate persons with illness associated with the outbreak, conduct tests to rule out other causes, monitor and provide oxygen for hyperventilation, attempt to minimize the individual's anxiety, notify public health authorities and seek to assure patients that, while their symptoms are real. Rumors and reports of suspected causes are not equivalent to confirmed results. Perhaps Dr. Jones would like to take a look at the American financial sector, where a sort of fiscal disco has been having much the same effect as the dancing plague of 1518. Just more expensive. 5. 43 missing Mexican students. It is 1 year on from the kidnap and disappearance of 43 students in the Mexican state of Guerrero. Their families occupy a cruel and desolate limbo between fading hope, despair and what have been revealed as layers of deception by the Mexican state. Their children remain missing, while official investigations into their disappearance are lacerated by independent outside experts. The authorities arrested a minor drugs cartel boss, Gildardo Lopez Estudillo, for his alleged role in the kidnapping on 26 September last year. But the arrest rings hollow in the wake of a 400-page report by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights a fortnight ago that tore the Mexican government's account of these events to shreds. The students, from Ayotzinapa Rural Teachers College, disappeared after police gunmen attacked buses the students had commandeered to attend demonstrations. The case caused international outrage, and became an embarrassment to the government of President Enrique Pena Nieto, who was anxious to promote the country's economic attractions to foreign business interests. In Mexico, the case was seen as emblematic of so many others, since the massacre of more than 600 students, in the capital in 1968, a commemoration of which the Ayotzinapa students were heading for, after a local protest against government education policy. The Mexican authorities found the attack had been ordered by the mayor of the town, Iguala, to which the students were heading, Jose Luis Abarca, who represents the left-wing opposition party PRD, and his wife Maria de Los Angeles Pineda. Pineda was to preside over the event against which the students were protesting, and her husband is said to have ordered their interception como si by any means. The couple vanished on indictment, but were later arrested in Mexico City, where they are now imprisoned for an unrelated offense committed in 2013. The founder of their party resigned in despair. The official account then found that the students had been mistaken for a group of drug traffickers challenging the local cartel, Guerreros Unidos, United Warriors, to whom police turned the students over for execution. 3 of the Guerreros hitmen confessed to taking the students to a rubbish dump at Cocula, on the way to which 15 were asphyxiated, and the rest shot and burned, their remains put in rubbish bags and dumped in a river. This account, by Jesus Murillo Caram, director of the Criminal Investigation Division PRG, failed to quell protests by the families of the missing, nor a widespread movement of those convinced of a cover-up of state involvement in the affair. There was outrage that the case could be closed with only the remains of one student found. Murillo Caram resigned, replaced by a successor quick to relegate the investigation, but the campaign gathered critical mass as the families toured Mexico and the United States. Some of the vast, peaceful demonstrations turned violent, in the Mexican capital and Guerrero state. The first evidential challenge to the government's account came from the reporter, and author Anabel Hernandez and her collaborator in the U.S., Steve Fisher, in Proceso magazine. Hernandez obtained footage shot by fellow students, showing a mayhem of gunfire and federal forces on the scene. Hernandez uncovered evidence that the authorities were monitoring the bus's movements. She shows that calls that had been made, from one commandeered bus, borrowed as the students put it, and that had been locked by its driver with the activists aboard had been logged in federal records. Hernandez was obliged to leave Mexico after receiving death threats, and is now based with Fisher at the Investigative Reporting Program at the University of California, Berkeley. Further journalism in Proceso by Marcella Trotti revealed an Army logbook noting military patrols of the streets around the attack on the buses, by a reaction force that registered corpses and encountered the wounded. Other forces gathered to discredit the official version. Scientists from the National Autonomous University of Mexico demonstrated that a fire capable of incinerating 43 bodies was not possible, within the perimeters of the Cocula dump. More importantly, the Mexican government's key independent partner in forensic investigations into other massacres cast its doubts. The Argentinian Forensic Anthropology Team, EF, had worked with the government on the worst single massacre of the narco war, of Central American migrants at San Fernando in Tamaulipas in 2010, and on the remains of murdered women in Ciudad Juarez on the U.S. border. The Mexican government has insisted since the kidnapping, that there is no reason to investigate or question federal police or army personnel, though they have bases in the area and a long history of confrontation with the students at Ensenada. In a letter published in this newspaper in February 2015, the Mexican ambassador to London described Anabel Hernandez's work as defamatory. Hernandez said, "Throughout these months, until now, the Mexican government has tried very hard to cover up the role of the army and the federal police that night in Iguala. Since my first article, I had the documents that proved that they were involved that night. The conclusions of both investigations confirm, with independent research, my investigation because they have access to the same documents and information. For years, journalism in Mexico has become very uncomfortable for the government and for organized crime. The number of journalists murdered makes this only too clear. The governor of Guerrero had no choice but to resign, and 80 arrests were made, including more than 40 police officers. And yet, the ultimate fate of the missing students still remains a mystery." 6. Siberian sinkholes. In the middle of last summer came news of a bizarre occurrence no one could explain. Seemingly out of nowhere, a massive crater appeared in one of the planet's most inhospitable lands. Early estimates said the crater, nestled in a land called the ends of the Earth, where temperatures can sink far below zero, yawned nearly 100 feet in diameter. The saga deepened. The Siberian crater wasn't alone. There were two more, ratcheting up the tension in a drama that hit its climax as a probable explanation surfaced. Global warming had thawed the permafrost, which had caused methane trapped inside the icy ground to explode. Gas pressure increased until it was high enough to push away the overlaying layers, in a powerful injection, forming the crater, one German scientist said at the time. Now, however, researchers fear there are more craters than anyone knew, and the repercussions could be huge. Russian scientists have now spotted a total of 7 craters, 5 of which are in the Yamal Peninsula. 2 of those holes have since turned into lakes. And one giant crater is rimmed by a ring of at least 20 mini craters, the Siberian Times reported. Dozens more Siberian craters are likely still out there, said Moscow scientist Vasily Bogoyavlinsky of the Oil and Gas Research Institute, calling for an urgent investigation. He fears that if temperatures continue to rise, and they were 5 degrees higher than average in 2012 and 2013, more craters will emerge in an area awash in gas fields vital to the national economy. It is important not to scare people, but to understand that it is a very serious problem and we must research this, he told the Siberian Times. We must research this phenomenon urgently, to prevent possible disasters. One potential disaster relates to the explosions themselves. No one has been hurt in any of the blasts, but given the size of some of the craters, it's fair to say the methane bursts are huge. Researchers are nervous about even studying them. Who knows when a methane geyser will shoot off again? These objects need to be studied, but it is rather dangerous for the researchers, Bogoyavlinsky told the Siberian Times. We know that there can occur a series of gas emissions over an extended period of time, but we do not know exactly when they might happen. It is very risky, because no one can guarantee there would not be new emissions. Making matters worse, the gas is extremely flammable. One of the methane bursts has already caught fire. Nearby residents in a town called Andiputa say, they recently saw a bright flash in the distance. Probably the gas ignited, Bogoyavlinsky said. This shows us that such an explosion could be rather dangerous and destructive. Years of experience has shown that gas emissions can cause serious damage to drilling rigs, oil and gas fields and offshore pipelines. Of particular interest is the Siberian crater B2. Since its emergence, only 6 miles away from Bovenkovo, a major Gazprom gas field, it has turned into a lake. But even now, photographs show, there are wisps of methane. The crater, covered by water, is still leaking gas. This haze that you see on the surface show that gas seeps that go from the bottom of the lake to the surface, Bogoyavlinsky told the Siberian Times. We call this process degassing. So, to recap, Siberia is warming. Permafrost thaws and spews methane, and blasts out a burst of highly flammable gas. Who could have guessed global warming would do all of that? No one knows what is happening in these craters at the moment, Bogoy Avlinsky said. We plan a new expedition. 7. The Confederate Treasury. One of the most enduring and bizarre mysteries of the American Civil War, is the final fate of millions of dollars worth of silver, from the Confederate Treasury. As the Union began its final path to victory, Confederate Treasurer George Strenholm liquidated the South's assets, with some saying that he passed them off to a group called the Knights of the Golden Circle to hide, until the South could rise again. When President Jefferson Davis abandoned Richmond in April 1865, his men carried nearly $1 million in gold, silver and jewels, but when he was captured just 6 weeks later, Davis had only a few Confederate banknotes. One of the biggest lost investments was 39 kegs of Mexican silver coins weighing more than 9,000 pounds, which disappeared without a trace as the Confederate Army retreated. The facts seem simple enough. On April 2, 1865, the Union Army faced tattered and battle-weary Confederate soldiers defending Richmond, Virginia under the overall command of General Robert T. Lee. Realizing that his lines could not hold, and that the fall of the Confederate capital was imminent, General Lee sent an urgent message to President Jefferson Davis, that the government must evacuate or face certain capture. Late that night a special train carrying the President and members of the Confederate cabinet departed Richmond for Danville, Virginia. Although the news was bleak, it was the hope of all on board that the struggle could be continued. Shortly after midnight a second train departed the Richmond station, following the fleeing government south. On board were all the hard currency reserves of the Confederate States of America, guarded by a group of young midshipmen from the Confederate Navy who had scuttled their vessel in the James River. Amongst the official records of the Confederacy were many, some say hundreds, of crates and barrels containing gold and silver coins, bullion, and a substantial amount of fine jewelry donated to the cause by women across the South. In addition, there was more than $450,000 in gold from Richmond Bank reserves, taken to keep it from falling into the hands of the invading Yankees. By the end of the day on April 3, 1865, Richmond lay in ashes as occupying Federal troops had fanned out across the city looking for stragglers. Over the ensuing weeks, Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, Lincoln was assassinated, and the dwindling band of Confederate fugitives continued to work their way south, hoping to escape west beyond the Mississippi, or perhaps overseas to Cuba or Britain. When Jefferson Davis and his ragged group were finally captured by members of the 4th Michigan Cavalry near Irwinville in South Georgia, on May 10, they had only a few dollars in their possession. The fabled riches of the vast Confederate treasure were not to be found. 8. Severed Foot Beach in British Columbia. British Columbia, Canada is known for many things: beautiful landscapes, great skiing, the 2010 Winter Olympics, and the human feet that have been washing up on its shores for the last 9 years. Since 2007, 12 human feet clad in running shoes have been found on the shores of British Columbia, from Jedediah Island to Botanical Beach. So far, the provincial coroner's office has identified 8 of the 12. Of those 8, there were 2 pairs. The remaining lone feet, the coroner determined, belonged to men. It had been nearly 4 years since a foot sighting, and then on 7 February a new one washed ashore, discovered by a hiker along Vancouver Island's Botanical Beach. 5 days later, another one appeared. The coroner's office confirmed they were a pair. After so many years, the arrival of human feet on the province's shores is old news. But when they started to be discovered in 2007, speculation about where they came from ran rampant, and pranksters even planted fake feet on the shores, just to add fuel to the fire. We've had people put dog foot skeletons in runners, and leave them on the beach, said Barb McClintock, who works at the coroner's office. And somebody even used old chicken bones. Since the first foot was discovered, theories about the feet have been numerous and creative. In 2008, a Toronto Star article said that speculation ranges from natural disasters, such as the tsunami of 2004, to the work of drug dealers, serial killers and human traffickers. In 2008, the man who found the 5th foot told The Guardian he suspected foul play. There's someone doing this all right. Think about it, If they tied a chain around someone's ankle and threw them overboard, the foot would just pop off. That could explain it. Maybe they got a lot of bodies stored up in a container, and they got washed out. We don't know. There's a lot of stuff goes on over there, he said. But McClintock said this is not the work of a serial killer, or the result of alien abductions. The coroner's office has ruled that all of the identified individuals committed suicide or died accidentally, most likely due to storms near the coast. After several of years and a dozen cases, McClintock said their work suggests the feet are separating from the bodies during decomposition. This occurs more quickly underwater than it would on land. The forensic anthropologists can be really sure of that, because they can't tell looking at the ends of the bones, whether they disarticulated naturally, or whether there's any sign that any mechanical force has been applied to them, whether there's any trauma, whether there's any tool marks on them, she said. And none of them have had anything like that. All the evidence is pointed to just this natural articulation process. But some people still have questions, like why did the feet only start turning up after 2007? The answer may be advancing shoe technology. More and more sports shoes are using air pockets, or light foam in their designs, which eventually allows them to be light enough to float and to wash up on shore. The coast of British Columbia sees many of these cases, because of tide and current patterns, according to McClintock. And while the odd foot pops up elsewhere in the world, for example, several have come ashore in Washington state, British Columbia remains in the spotlight. But McClintock has no doubt that this occurs worldwide, and not just on her coast. Presumably there probably are a bunch of running shoes bouncing around out there, she said. But no one's ever going to find them. 9. Voynich Manuscript. The message inside the world's most mysterious medieval manuscript has eluded cryptographers, mathematicians and linguists for over a century. And for many, the so-called Voynich book is assumed to be a hoax. But a new study, published in the journal PLOS One, suggests the manuscript may, after all, hold a genuine message. Scientists say they found linguistic patterns they believe to be meaningful words within the text. Whether or not it really does have any meaningful information, though, is much debated by amateurs and professionals alike. It was even investigated by a team of prominent code breakers during WEI who successfully cracked complex encrypted enemy messages, but they failed to find meaning in the text. The book has been dated to the early 1400s, but it largely disappeared from public record, until 1912 when an antique book dealer called Wilfrid Voynich bought it amongst a number of second-hand publications in Italy. Marcello Montemurro, a theoretical physicist from the University of Manchester, UK, has spent many years analyzing its linguistic patterns, and says he hopes to unravel the manuscript's mystery, which he believes his new research is one step closer to doing. The text is unique, there are no similar works, and all attempts to decode any possible message in the text have failed. It's not easy to dismiss the manuscript as simple nonsensical gibberish, as it shows a significant linguistic structure, he told BBC News. Dr. Montemurro and a colleague used a computerized statistical method to analyze the text, an approach that has been known to work on other languages. They focused on patterns of how the words were arranged in order to extract meaningful content-bearing words. There is substantial evidence that content-bearing words tend to occur in a clustered pattern, where they are required as part of the specific information being written, he explains. Over long spans of texts, words leave a statistical signature about their use. When the topic shifts, other words are needed. The semantic networks we obtain clearly show that related words tend to share structure similarities. This also happens to a certain degree in real languages. Dr. Montemurro believes it unlikely that these features were simply incorporated into the text to make a hoax more realistic, as most of the required academic knowledge of these structures did not exist at the time the Voynich manuscript was created. Though he has found a pattern, what the words mean remains a mystery. The very fact that a century of brilliant minds have analyzed the work with little progress means some believe a hoax is the only likely explanation. Gordon Rugg, a mathematician from Keele University, UK, is one such academic. He has even produced his own complex code deliberately similar to Voynich's to show how a text can appear to have meaningful patterns, even though it is gibberish hoax text. He says the new findings do not rule out the hoax theory, which the researchers argue. The findings aren't anything new. It's been accepted for decades that the statistical properties of Voynish's are similar, but not identical, to those of real languages. I don't think there's much chance that the Voynich manuscript is simply an unidentified language, because there are too many features in its text that are very different from anything found in any real language. Gordon Rugg does not believe it contains an unknown code, which is another theory of what the text may be. Some of the features of the manuscript's text, such as the way that it consists of separate words, are inconsistent with most methods of encoding text. Modern codes almost invariably avoid having separate words, as those would be an easy way to crack most coding systems. As to its enduring appeal, an unsolved cipher could be hiding almost anything, says Craig Bauer, author of Secret History, The Story of Cryptology. It could solve a major crime, reveal buried treasure worth millions, or in the case of the Voynich manuscript, rewrite the history of science, he adds. Dr. Bauer's opinion of whether it is meaningful is often swayed, he admits. While he recently believed it to be a hoax, the new analysis has now shifted his opinion. But despite this, he still believes it is a made-up language, as opposed to a real naturally evolving one, or it would have been broken years ago. However, I still feel that it's very much an open question, and I may change my mind a few times, before a proof is obtained one way or the other. But Dr. Montemurro is firm in his belief, and argues that the hoax hypothesis cannot possibly explain the semantic patterns he has discovered. He is aware that his analysis leaves many questions still unanswered, such as whether it is an encoded version of a known language, or whether a totally invented language. After this study, any new support for the hoax hypothesis should address the emergence of this sophisticated structure explicitly. So far, this has not been done. There must be a story behind it, which we may never know, Dr. Montemurro adds.